the hydraulics in a skid steer is a series of like pumps, hydraulic lines, and the hydraulic lines have oil, hydraulic oil in them, and the pump creates pressure and sends it to different areas depending on which valve is open. So if you have hand controls and you want to lift the boom up or down, then when you hit the lever, then that tells the oil to go a certain direction to the cylinders that lift it up. If you hit the lever the other way, then the valve opens up and lets the oil come back into the reservoir. A skid steer is used for many things. It used to be used for like loading manure up, and it still can be, but it takes the place of a scoop shovel or a fork. And material handling. Today skid steers are used for endless things. They have different attachments. On the front you can have brooms that will brush like a sidewalk or brush snow. You have grapple rakes that have grapples that come over the front to grab things. You have augers, you have mowers, you have anything. Hydraulics can run just about anything because it takes the place of a direct power shaft, a PTO shaft. As far as replacing a pitchfork or a shovel, I grew up and we had livestock in small pens inside buildings, and so the skid steer that we had wasn't small enough to get in there. So we had to fork out the manure or whatever we were doing by hand, and then eventually, as the skid loaders became smaller or you changed the sheds, then the skid steer could do the work. Instead of doing it manually, you could sit in the machine and operate it. And today's skid steers even have air conditioning, they're computer controlled, they're heat, whereas back when I grew up, the skid steers were just a bare machine, so to speak, no creature comforts. Functions of a hydraulic system, to my understanding, are you have to have a pump, you have to have a reservoir to hold the additional oil that you need. You will need an oil cooler, which is like a radiator in an engine, which the radiator cools the engine. The hydraulic oil cooler cools the oil, because when it's working and it gets hot, that generates heat. And then you have to have either a series of pumps. One pump provides it to another one, and then it does a job, or it does a cylinder, moves things, and back and forth with cylinders so you can grab things. Different components in the skid steer would be your basic engine, which supplies the power that makes the hydraulic pumps work. Each wheel will have a hydraulic motor on them, and thus you can turn zero turn on different directions. You can go forward or backwards and turn on a dime. And then it'll have a different, that'd be the drivetrain on the motor for the wheels. Then the hydraulics that control the boom and the bucket or any attachments will be a separate system, and they will have the same thing: motors and cylinders, oil lines, a reservoir, a cooler, and different valves. The valves open and close depending on what the operator wants to do. The items that work well on a skid steer are in tight areas, in small areas, things that you have to turn around quickly, that you can do endless things with skid loaders, so you have endless attachments. But they all started out, to be maneuvering around in tight little areas, and today they're used in, like, pouring sidewalks, because instead of doing it by hand, they can have a small bucket, and they can move the dirt to the right level for the sidewalk. I'm sure you can put lasers on them. If you're in a construction, you could have a laser. The laser then would control the hydraulics, and the operator just has to steer it where it's supposed to go and how he wants it to do it. There are different areas that can be improved in skid steers, and they have over time. Used to be skid loaders only had tires on them, and tires would have air, and then they would go flat if you would puncture the tire. Now today they have hard tires that are solid rubber, and those maybe aren't as nice because of the ride, because it's very rigid. The other things that they've gone to now are tracks. So a skid steer has a track, a rubber track, just like a bulldozer would, except for it's made out of rubber, and so then they have a lot better traction. Other improvements that they've made since they started out is they've made them more powerful. Hydraulics have gone up greatly. The power of hydraulics has increased tremendously, what they can do, what they can lift. And then obviously the air conditioning, the heat, with cabs, enclosure, radios, that sort of thing. A lot of stuff that's remotely controlled. The computer on board will tell you if it overheats or adjusts itself and some of those things. Other than that, other improvements are, I suppose, size. They get big ones, they get small ones, depending on the application. Vermeer's makes it's not a skid loader, but it's kind of more like a power scoop, where instead of sitting in it, you stand on the back of it and you have hand controls, kind of like you would road a wheelbarrow, but it's a power and it has a boom and stuff, and you can dig and lift with that. So they go from really small machines to pretty big machines. Okay, so stories of a skid loader. So I grew up with a John Deere 90. It was a gas, and the one you see the video of is a diesel and has, I don't know how many horsepower, but way more horsepower. That one skid steer that you see in the video will probably lift about 2,500 pounds, and the skid steer I grew up with probably lifted maybe 1,000. And so we did everything around the yard with the skid steer. And I can remember one time I was moving dirt, and this is an example of why you must always be careful and wear your seatbelt. Actually, today's skid loaders, you have to put the seatbelt on, and it won't even let this thing operate unless the seatbelt is engaged. Now there are ways of getting around that, but I wouldn't advise that. But anyway, I was moving dirt, and dirt is very heavy, and so I was moving a lot of dirt, and I had bucketfuls of dirt, and so we were trying to move it, and I was trying to dig out a spot to defer the water. And I can remember one time that I had a load too heavy, and I don't know if I had the boom a little bit high or not, but anyway, I hit something and the skid steer went forward, and I didn't have my seatbelt on, and I got thrown forward, and the only thing that stopped me was hitting up on the gauges in the key, because it had a roll guard on it, hitting that with my head and then bouncing back. And so that was a real wake-up call to be safe. That particular skid steer, just with the application back when I was younger, it had been on every side but its top, because of the different things that were going on when we were in some dirt and doing some stuff where it was muddy and stuff, and we've had it before. We'll tip it on its side, and so then you have to be careful of that. You get into certain predicaments, and yeah, that's what happens. So safety is obviously #1 concern.